Hello everyone and welcome to Fiction Friday. Today's tale is a post-apocalyptic adventure called My Lucky Day. I hope you enjoy it. The old-timers like to say that, before the monsters came, the city was home to over 1 million people. Kant couldn't imagine that many people. There were a few hundred in the camp and that felt like way too many most days. He wasn't exactly what you would call a sociable person. The only thing being friendly would get you was a knife in the back or your stuff stolen. Out in the ruins, all you had to worry about was marauders, monsters, falling debris, and packs of feral beasts. In his 20 years as a professional scavenger, Kant had learned to avoid all of those dangers, at least as much as they could be avoided. The monsters at least were only a problem at night. That was the inhuman monsters. He didn't know what their proper name was. Everyone just called them monsters. It seemed to fit. Most stood like hunched-over men with claws and fangs. He'd heard stories of giants over 10 feet tall, but dismissed them as a means to get a free drink. On the other hand, he'd seen one with 4 arms with his own eyes, so maybe a giant monster wasn't impossible. He walked along the broken blacktop, head on a swivel and ears pricked for danger. Somewhere off to his left, another chunk of the city crashed to the ground. Sounded like a fire escape. Those fell off more than anything. Soon enough, the city was going to be nothing but a giant heap of rubble. Off to his right, maybe 3/4 of a mile off, the remains of the broken towers stabbed into the sky. No scavenger with a brain in his head went anywhere near those towers, not unless he was desperate. They all had deep underground levels where the monsters like to sleep during the day. Get caught anywhere in the vicinity after sunset and you'd be dead in minutes. Or wish you were. Kant preferred to work outside the city center. Safer that way, though safe was a relative term in the city. He'd explored all the neighborhoods, some more than others, and knew which gangs controlled what territory and how best to avoid them. The buildings to his left and right were primarily former businesses on the first floor with apartments above. Most were only 3 or 4 stories tall. His target today was a pharmacy that had partially collapsed, leaving the drugs inside largely inaccessible except to skinny rats like him. The only advantage to growing up on a near-starvation diet was his scrawny build. The narrow, tight, hidden places were his playground. Always had been. It's where he went to hide from the bigger boys that liked to use him as a punching bag. It was also where he found the big, hairy spiders he put in their sleeping bags as payback. Kant grinned at the memory for a second and then forced it to the back of his mind. Distractions out here were the most dangerous thing to a scavenger. Besides, the pharmacy was 3 doors up. It was time to get his game face on. He left the center of the street and angled right toward the alley that separated the pharmacy from the liquor store beside it. That building was in perfect condition and had been cleaned out long before Kant was born. Anything alcoholic was in big demand. He found a bottle now and then in his wanderings, and they always brought something good in trade. Kant froze a few feet from the opening he used. Someone or something had tossed aside the cracked pallet he used to hide the entrance. He looked all around and listened hard, but the area was deserted. Whoever tried to get at his cash had done it a while ago. He should probably give up on this spot and try somewhere else, but his best chance of success was here. He sighed and shrugged out of his pack. Next, a long, heavy duster came off, leaving him in a torn black t-shirt and jeans. He unzipped the pack and pulled out a 4-foot length of rope and a scrap of paper. Dr. Sarah had written down exactly which medicines she needed. He couldn't pronounce most of them, but he didn't need to. All he needed to do was find bottles with writing that matched the list. She needed 100 pills of each kind. Kant doubted he'd find that many, but he'd try. He had a reputation to uphold after all. A rubber band secured the list to his wrist, and the rope attached the pack to his right ankle. Last but not least, he drew the long knife at his belt and clamped it between his teeth. If he ran into anything, he wanted the blade handy. Having it ready had saved him more than once when he ran into the big brown rats that lived in the ruins. Preparations complete, Kant knelt and went into the opening head first. He had to twist just so to get his shoulders through. Once that was done, the rest was easy. He pulled his legs through, crawled over a pile of broken bricks and under a fallen steel shelf. His shirt caught on a sharp corner, gaining a new tear. Something sharp jabbed him in the side. He shifted and kept going, under and over twisted metal, around shattered glass, until at last he reached the smashed counter behind which waited the medicine. There was even enough room to stand. He did so gladly. Crawling around like a mutant badger was hard on your body. He sheathed his knife, picked up his pack, and unzipped it. The 3 plastic containers for the pills given to him by the doctor sat on top of his other junk. On the back wall, fallen shelves leaned against each other, their contents having spilled to the ground years ago. Kant hoped he never got sick. Who knew how long past the expiration date most of this stuff was? The doctor insisted they were still effective, and she offered him a fine steel short sword if he could fill her order. Not that he had anything against his trusty knife, but Kant was looking to upgrade. What he really wanted was a gun, but those were damn hard to come by, and the bullets even harder. Well, time to get to work. He took the first bottle, popped it open, and consulted his list. Something that started with an S. He went to the second to last shelf and started looking. He could have just brought it all back, of course. Probably should have, but it was safer here than in his locker at camp. It was easy to say giving the pills to the clinic was the right thing to do, but Kant relied on his exclusive supply to live. He needed good stuff to trade if he wanted to eat, and medicine was one of the best things around. After 10 minutes of searching, he found a label that matched. The pill jug was half full, plenty to fill her order. He started counting pills. When he reached 70, the screech of metal on metal filled the room. Kant froze. Was it just the debris settling, or was something in here with him? He sealed the jar, his count forgotten, and pulled his knife. It seemed far too puny, but was all he had and was far better than his bare hands. "Hello," Kant said. Silence. He frowned and walked a few paces toward where he heard the noise. "Hello?" "Help," a faint voice said from within the rubble. Kant frowned and looked around. There was no way someone could have crawled through the tightly packed rubble. He looked up. There was a hole in the ceiling. Whoever it was must have fallen through the floor of the apartment above. How they got up there was another question altogether. A question that was none of his business. If he stopped what he was doing every time some idiot got in trouble, he'd never get anything done. Besides, it was probably a trick to steal his gear. "Please," the voice said. It sounded like a girl, but was so breathy he couldn't say for sure. "Help me." Kant slapped his forehead and slid his hand down his face. "Stupid, stupid idiot." "Are you hurt?" he asked. "My ribs, and I'm stuck." "Stuck on what?" "My right leg went down between some debris. I can't pull it free. Please, I've been here for at least 2 days." "Hang on." Kant looked up at the hole and down at the junk heap. His best guess put her about 15 feet from the clear space behind the counter. The metal and broken shelving was even more tightly packed over there. She probably hit the back of a shelf and crashed through, upsetting the balance of the heap and sending something crashing on her leg. How was he supposed to get her free? "Are you going to help me? The last person just ignored my calls." Kant's heart skipped a beat. Last person? That wasn't good. "When was this?" "Yesterday, just after sunset. Does it matter?" Only an idiot went out after sunset. An idiot or a monster. Though if it was a monster, why didn't it dig her out and tear her limb from limb? Kant didn't know and didn't want to think about it. The damn things were a mystery to normal people. "It might if who or whatever comes back when I'm around. Plenty of people would kill to keep this stash a secret." Kant immediately realized how that sounded. Not me, mind you, but one of the gang, certainly. He needed to hurry. The busted counter separating the main part of the store from the pharmacy was about the right length. If he put it over the junk, it should spread his weight enough to keep it from collapsing. And if it didn't, he'd end up impaled on a piece of steel. The smart thing to do would be to gather as many pills as he could and leave her. Kant grunted as he lifted the unbroken end of the counter and placed it at the base of the junk pile. Yes, that would be the smart thing, But how many times had the people at his camp told him he was an idiot? He couldn't remember, but it was time to prove them right. As easily and gently as he could, Kant pushed the counter across the junk heap. Let me know when you hear something scraping over your head. 5 feet out, then 10, and still nothing. He was almost out of counter when she said, Something just passed in front of the light. He stopped pushing. Directly over you? A little to my left. I think I can almost reach it. The tip of a very dirty finger poked out of the trash and wriggled us 6 inches from the counter. Okay, I know where you are now. Hang on, I'm on the way. Kant climbed out onto the counter and inched his way down. He only had about 2 feet of width to work with, and every time he pulled himself down it wobbled, reminding him of how stupid this idea was. By some miracle he made it to where he saw the finger and looked down. Through a gap in the debris, a filthy girl about 16 stared up at him. She had landed 6 inches from a length of broken steel that would have run her straight through. If a person trapped in a heap of rubble could be said to be lucky, this girl was. Hi there. Can you reach up and grab my hand? Maybe I can pop you free of whatever you're stuck on. She reached up and he grabbed her wrist while she grabbed his. For a kid trapped with no food or water, she had a strong grip. Ready? She nodded. Kant started to pull and she hissed. If she busted her ribs, him yanking on them wasn't going to feel too good. But it was the only way he had to get her out. She rose a few inches, then caught. That's as far as I could get on my own, she said. Pull harder. Are you sure? I'm not staying here. He had to admire someone with guts like that. Kant took a hold of the second hand and braced his feet and pulled for all he was worth. She screamed and came free. Kant sprawled on the counter to keep them both from tumbling into the rubble. When the wobbling stopped, he crawled back to the open space and she followed. After 30 harrowing seconds, they were both clear and he let out a long sigh. Are you okay? More or less, thanks. I'm Glinda, by the way. I appreciate you saving my life. Glad I could help. My name's Kant. Nice to meet you. He spun around to face her. Glinda's clothes were a torn mess that might once have been jeans and a t-shirt. Her right pant leg had been torn away from the knee down, and her leg underneath had an ugly red scrape down to her ankle. It didn't seem to be bleeding, at least. Still, wouldn't hurt to clean it up a bit. They had plenty of supplies on hand after all. While Kant searched for peroxide bandages and gauze, he asked, How'd you find my honey hole? By accident. Me and my dad were scavenging upstairs when I fell through. He said he'd be back for me, but that was 2 days ago, so I'm not holding out much hope. Probably figured I was as good as dead and took off. Some dad. Kant grabbed a bottle of disinfectant from a high shelf and returned with his supplies. He sat beside her leg and opened the bottle. Before he could break the inner seal, something occurred to him. You mean you didn't come in through the crawl space I use? I didn't even know it existed. Why? Someone uncovered it. If it wasn't you, it must have been whoever you heard yesterday. I need to get you fixed up, gather as much as I can and get out of here before they come back. Do you have some place to go? She shrugged, then winced when he poured the peroxide. Dad and I had a few hideouts. He might even be in one, drinking up valuable trade goods to drown his guilt over abandoning me. He'll welcome me with open arms and tears, and then when we get in another tight spot, he'll abandon me again. I don't blame him for his weakness. It's just who he is. Charming. Kant finished wrapping her leg and tied off the gauze. There, that's the extent of my first aid skills. She touched her freshly wrapped leg and smiled. Thanks again. If we run into each other another day, I'm going to owe you a favor. Kant nodded. It was easy enough to say to a person that you'd probably never see again. And should they run into each other again, he seriously doubted she'd honor that promise. There was only one real rule in the city. Survival of the fittest. Promises were made to be broken. He pointed to the narrow crawl space. It's tight, but you look slim enough to fit. I hope you find your dad. Hey. She reached into her pants pocket and pulled out an unscratched lottery ticket. Here. This is the only thing we found upstairs of even passing interest. Consider it a thank you gift. Kant took the ticket and dropped it into his pack. Glinda dropped to her stomach and started crawling. He put her out of her mind and started gathering pills. His bag was half full when something scuffed behind him. Glinda slowly worked her way back into the clearing. He was about to ask what she was doing when she pressed a finger to her lips and mouthed the word Marauders. One of the bloody gangs must have stumbled across this tunnel. It was probably one of them that crawled in yesterday. But that made no sense. If a marauder had found this place, they'd have cleaned it out, not left it for another day. Kant was even more curious now about who Glinda had heard, assuming she didn't bang her head and dream the whole thing. "Glinda, sweetheart, are you okay in there?" "That's my dad," Glinda whispered. "They must have snatched him." "What do you want to do?" Kant asked. "What can I do? He's my dad." In a louder voice she said, "I'm here, Dad." "Oh, thank goodness," her father said. "I've made some new friends, and they'd like you to bring out all the pills you can carry." Glinda looked at Kant, who rested a hand on his knife and shook his head. No bloody way was he giving up all this. He'd done his good deed for the day. Damned if he owed those two anything more. "I'm still stuck," Glinda shouted. "Can you help me get out?" There was a long moment of silence before he said, "None of us will fit through the opening, but we have some rope. I'll go back to the second-story apartment and lower it to you. Maybe we can pull you free. Hold on." "We've got about 5 minutes," Glinda said. "Do you have any ideas?" "Climb back to the middle of the junk pile and work your leg in so it looks stuck. Let them rescue you. I'll take my pack full of pills and sneak out the tunnel." He couldn't believe he was about to say this. "You can have what's left. It might be enough to buy your lives." She stared at him, looking every bit as surprised by his offer as he felt. "You'd do that for us?" Kant raced to shovel as much into his pack as he could. The truth was, now that one of the gangs knew about this place, it was too risky to come back. "Sure, this seems like my day to be generous. Just don't mention me to anyone, okay?" "I promise, and thank you again." He zipped his pack up, a few seconds before the footsteps sounded on the floor above. It was time to make himself scarce. "Good luck." Kant crawled down the passage, eager to get out of sight before the marauders appeared. He didn't bother to attach the pack to his legs with the rope. Instead, he hooked the shoulder strap with his toe and dragged it behind him. He heard muffled voices. It sounded like the rescue operation had begun. Daylight shone through the gap in the wall when he reached it. Kant eased out just enough to look left and right. The alley was empty for the moment. He breathed a sigh of relief, pulled himself out, shouldered his pack, and took off. At the end of the block, he stopped and hid behind a pile of rubble within sight of the pharmacy. If someone had asked why, he couldn't have said why he hung around to see how Glinda and her father made out. Morbid curiosity, perhaps. Considering everything he'd invested in her, he couldn't deny wanting to see her make it out in one piece. A couple of minutes passed before a huge crash shook the pharmacy and dust blasted out every gap. The second floor must have collapsed under the gang's weight. Maybe it buried every one of the bastards. Kant wasn't that lucky, but a man could dream. At least the area above Glinda was open. Hopefully nothing crushed her. He sighed and started back toward the pharmacy. In for a penny, in for a pound. He'd already saved her once. What was one more time? It took Kant only a few minutes to find the back stairs to the second floor. Nothing gave way when he stepped on them, so he scampered up to the top where an open door waited. A length of rope sat on the edge of the pit, its end hanging down into the store. Beyond it lay nothing but open space and a handful of jagged, snapped-off floor joists. Everything else had fallen into the pharmacy below. No movement was visible through the still settling dust. If she died after everything Kant did to save her, he was going to be thoroughly pissed. "Glinda, are you down there?" "Where else would I be?" she asked in a strained voice. Kant grinned. "Crushed under the rubble was my first thought. Anyone else survive?" "I don't know. I can hardly see through the dust." "Dad!" 30 seconds of silence didn't bode well. "I've got their rope. I might be able to get you out if you can reach it." "I can't even see you," she said, "much less a rope. Let's wait a few minutes." "It's getting late," Kant said. "I don't want to be caught out here after dark. I've been thinking, and it occurred to me that your visitor last night might not have been human." "Dad!" she screamed at this time. Still no reply. "Dad! I can't leave him here." Look, I've been pretty accommodating, Kant said, but I'm not going to get eaten for you. I'm gone in 5 minutes. If you want out, speak now or forever hold your peace. There was a groan, and she asked, Dad? I'm going to gut you, you little bitch. Throw me the rope, now! Not her father, then. A marauder must have survived the fall. Kent tied the rope off to the railing outside and leaned over the threshold. Glinda was right where he last saw her, precariously balanced on the highest point of the junk heap. She was going to have to swing over and then climb up. There was no way he could secure the rope directly over her head. Here it comes. He threw the rope as far out as he could, and she grabbed the last 3 feet. He blew out of breath. So far, so good. Glinda pulled the rope tight and looked around as if not sure what to do next. He was about to shout encouragement when she jumped and swung his way. She was about halfway across the debris field when a bloody hand shot out of the junk and caught her ankle. When Glinda screamed, Kant nearly jumped out of his skin. The marauder pulled, and she slid down. The junk pile shuddered as a brawny man's head and shoulders forced their way out. If anyone's climbing out of here, it's me. Kant pulled his knife. If Glinda didn't make it out, no way was he letting a marauder escape. The junk pile shuddered again. A moment later, a second man burst free. He tackled the marauder and forced him to release Glinda. Dad, she screamed. Get out of here, her father shouted. The marauder punched him in the face, but her father held tight. Go, he said. I can't, not without you. The marauder pulled a knife and drove it into her father's stomach. Still, he refused to release his grip. Go. It came out as more of a last breath than a shout. Glinda climbed, slowly, hand over hand. Behind her, the marauder finally got free of her dying father and started up the rope behind her. Kant's jaw ached from clenching it so tight. This was going to be close. When she neared the top, he reached down and took her hand. With a final heave of effort, he yanked her over the lip of the threshold. The marauder's hand appeared a moment later. Kant stabbed it. Son of a bitch, the marauder shouted. If he didn't like that, he was really going to dislike this. The razor-sharp edge of Kant's knife sliced the rope with a single blow, sending the marauder tumbling into the junk below. He wiped the sweat from his brow. That had been far too close. Kant sheathed his blade and stood. We need to go. It'll be dark soon, and all that blood is sure to draw monsters. She shot him a pained look, and it dawned on him that most of the blood belonged to her dead father. Sorry. Still, we need to find somewhere secure to hole up for the night. No way are we going to make it back to the camp before dark. One of our hideouts is only a block east of here, Glinda said. The door's strong. We'll be safe there until morning. Perfect. Lead the way. It was almost completely dark when they threw the bar across the door of Glinda's hideout. It wasn't much more than an 8x8 reinforced box that might have been a closet at some point. 2 heaps of scrapped cloth served as beds, and there was a closed box in the corner. Not luxurious, but given his options, Kant wasn't about to complain. It was the first really good thing he ever did for me. Glinda sniffed as tears ran down her face. Why did he have to die? Kant had no idea what to say. He was a scrounger. He didn't know the first thing about comforting teenage girls. Finally, he said, he had to die because it was the only way he could save you. In the end, that meant more to him than his own survival. You have to admit, that's a pretty cool way to go out. She smiled through her tears. It is pretty cool, isn't it? Dad would have liked that. In the distance, screams echoed in the darkness. It sounded like the monsters found the surviving marauders. That should keep them busy until morning. I hope they tear the bastards apart, Glinda said with more venom than a kid should be able to muster. Kent needed to find something to distract her. Then he remembered the lottery ticket. There was no one left to collect from, but it might be good for a laugh. He pulled it out of his pack and drew his knife. What do you say we give this a scratch? They sat side by side and he scratched off the first winning number. He stared for a moment. What do you know? We're millionaires. Must be our lucky day. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Fiction Friday. If you'd like to buy a copy of the short story you just heard, you can find a link in the description. If you enjoyed the story, please leave an offering to the algorithm by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Until next time, goodbye.